Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and those of you that have joined, and welcome to our Curiosity session. I see people are still joining, Prof. I think for me, Curiosity is one of my favorite parts of the month, particularly because it is really the time in which we get to kind of explore topics, ideas, different people's perspectives. Today, we've got an amazing lineup of both students and guest speaker who I will introduce to you later. And then very excitingly, later on, we have the talents of Lita from Three Stick Men, who is one of the most amazing graphicists. And what she does is she will represent what we are discussing today, particularly on the side of the students and side of the guest speaker, and present it to us graphically at the end. We always start off with a little bit of a brain teaser or a little bit of a debate or a little bit of a trend-setting kind of discussion. So today, Prof. Harvey and I, this morning when we saw each other, we were discussing this concept of the Da Vinci principle of truth. And it's always a big debate at Da Vinci because the big thing about truth is that, truth is very relative because it's perspective-based. So when we say Da Vinci, we want you to find truth, we mean we want you to find the truth that is the most true to you. But I think connected to that, if we see what's happening in society at the moment with the Zondo Commission, we see what's happened with some of the PPE scandals and things that we've been addressing. The debate we want to pose today is, how do you think that we can bring truth and integrity into the way in which we govern society, the way in which we want to truly work towards creating sustainable societies? So I guess the question is, we know that there isn't an absolute truth, but there are aspects or values connected to truth and integrity. How do we make sure that we take those aspects and we can, perhaps if we were government advisors or if we were business advisors, and many of you are, what would you advise people to do to bring in truth and integrity to the way in which we sustain society, run society, lead society? I think for me, the biggest part around it is that if we don't lead in a transparent manner, in a truthful manner, and in a manner with integrity, we will destroy any possibility of truly sustainable societies, which, as you know, as Da Vincians, that's what we really want to work towards.
Truth is about consequence. As you were talking, I was thinking about this, about the Zondo Commission and everything. And people are more likely to tell the truth if there's a consequence to them not telling the truth. And I think, particularly if you're in business and maybe government, if there's a consequence to you not telling the truth, then you're more likely to tell the truth without having to rely on us telling the truth on purpose because we want to. I think maybe the fear thing might work. I don't know what the rest of the team think about that.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting position because I think having these honest discussions, and adult conversations about corruption and truth, we actually accept that by nature we're all just humans and can make mistakes and sometimes make ethical unsound conditions. So and I think what you're saying with hindsight, we realize that was a wrong decision, and maybe at that point in time, on the spur of the moment, in context, it was not the best or the most appropriate decision.
So there are two thoughts that immediately come to mind. One is that truth is complex. We tend to think of truth as being very simplistic, and therefore, we think that people can capture their truth in a sentence, and I don't think that is an accurate perspective. And therefore, I think it means we have got to become a lot better at facilitating and enabling dialogue and true exploratory truth-seeking, I think is very important. And another perspective on this, I've just actually come off a call where I've been talking to some leaders around the efficiency and effectiveness perspectives, and how often when we are communicating, we are looking at things from an efficiency perspective, and businesses are focused on efficiency. But if we are too focused on efficiency, we often lose effectiveness. And so it is, how do we navigate the sort of lines between efficiency and effectiveness, especially when it comes to deep understanding and truth.
I think just another lens to that would be, say, in that matching the efficiency and effectiveness, to also maybe add the long-term view, because quite often we sometimes so solution-focused that we look at the immediate short-term, and although we know it's the right thing, it's maybe not cost-effective, hence we don't always take the long-term position. So I think that's also interesting. But it's definitely complex.
In courts, one is asked to swear to tell the truth. But in the old days, it used to be to swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And lawyers do not like tautologies. So is there the assumption is that there's no tautology between the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So that suggests that truth has to be seen in context. It has to be seen in a much wider perspective than just what it is on face value.
Yeah, and just responding to that, Brian, I've got a friend that's an advocate. You always remind me, just need to be 51% correct to win the court case. So there's another fine line between truth and reality as well there, which I found, difficult if one trying to be the right ethical thing. Because quite often, the whole discussion around truth sits immediately opposite to corruption. And, we almost have the idea that if you're truthful, there will not be corruption. I also think that's not necessarily correct. There's also a fine line in there. So where does your juridical system or your justice kick in? And sometimes you need to make the better decision for the bigger community at that point, which might not be 100% correct. Whether you save one life or 10 lives, that's normally the balance. It would benefit the majority. And I think that's quite often the conundrum we're also sitting with.
I think the issue about truth is also your own believed truth. And if we are referencing what's happening at Zondo and some of the other inquiries that are underway, I think it's also important to note that many people who are presenting evidence also have a believed truth that might not be the actual truth. And I think that, it speaks to the heart of the matter about if you're trying to understand what is truthful, so what actually happened, which is an ontological conversation, or how you understand what actually is truthful, which is the epistemological conversation. And they're two different exercises. And I think that certainly the esteemed people that are sitting in this house today can help answer that distinction, because they're not necessarily the same thing. And this is one other issue that I really wanted to put. We need to also be able to understand to what end you're putting the so-called truth forward. So what do you aim to achieve by talking about the so-called truth? Because as one of the colleagues mentioned earlier, there's usually an agenda behind that, which is why both the ontological and the epistemological approach is necessary to understand the context for that so-called truth being put forward.
We prioritize the end, and when we use the end to justify the means, we are effectively not telling the whole truth in so many ways. So I see this in marketing. I see this in a lot of media consulting, that we sort of spin the truth a bit, and only highlight certain facts. And it's not always the whole truth. So I think Dana makes a very good point. And the other thing is, I think in places like the Zondo Commission, we also see values conflicts emerging. So everybody seems to affirm the truth and that it's a priority, but there are other values that are important as well. And so for some people, value to the party, value to a loyal leader, to be loyal to a leader, to show that you're part of an inner circle, is then in conflict with some of the truth. And so reputation management and how we perceive ourselves actually enables us to deceive ourselves and lie to ourselves. And that is often evidenced in these sorts of commissions as well, where people forget certain facts or certain things they did because it doesn't fit with their personal picture of themselves.
For me, point a very interesting thing, and I would love to get the view of the audience, because what you're both saying, there's a level of accountability that comes with the truth. So at the end, whether that's a decision from a committee or the decision from an individual, you are actually saying to everybody out there, this is what I stand for and I will live up to that. And that's also part of the truth, to be at ease and peace with that. So I think the accountability for me is a reality that I sometimes get the impression people don't always value that truthfulness because of the accountability aspect.
The key driver indeed is integration of corporate governance in sustainability as a pillar, perhaps in a systematic way. In terms of business leadership, a dialogue is also key, especially continuous training and leadership development, so that we continuously impart on the knowledge and skills as far as efficiency and effectiveness is concerned. Things around the truth are very dynamic, so continuous improvement is actually supported through continuous trainings and development. Thank you.
Thank you, Delia. I think that's a very valid point on the dialogue and the role in business leadership. And I think looking at what's happening at the moment is exactly what we need.
And I think that the more we keep debating and the more we keep challenging ourselves and the more we keep questioning these things, the better it is for society. And I really hope, every one of you here today, those that have spoken and those that are have not, have a way of impacting society. And I always hope that we keep these things, these pillars, really close to what we do on a continual basis. And I think part of the reason that we do this at Curiosity is so that we can actually hear diverse opinions, but also for us to spark debate. And if you guys have any topics or anything that you would like to debate, we're happy for the audience to also be part of that, to mail us, to throw something out. We really do enjoy that. So thank you to all those that have contributed and those that have been part of listening to the discussion. I think it's important for all of us to take stock of where we are as a society, not only as individuals, and to really look through the various lenses of the environment. At Da Vinci, we speak of the micro, the meso, the exo, the macro, etc. I think one of my favorite parts of Curiosity is always the student speaker, because myself, having gone through a PhD, I do know how it is a little bit nerve-wracking, but I will honestly say that the contributions that other people made to my study is what I feel really gave it rich depth. I think that when we just sort of engage only with ourselves, our supervisor, and keep it quite limited, we don't always get, the objective and tough feedback that we sometimes do from people that don't understand our study as intimately. I just want to point out that one of the important things for our students is that they are generally in the beginning stages of their doctorates. And so when they come and speak, and so the idea is, please, for those of you in the audience, to give your opinion, to guide the student in terms of your views, because all of our views can contribute towards research output. So please, when Ralton is speaking, to just give the opportunity to speak, but also then to try and contribute to bettering the study as Ralton goes on with the journey. So Ralton Moses is the impact, the study is the impact of regulation on the South African pharmaceutical industry. Absolutely something with the vaccines that is, I think, going to be even more of a relevant study. We saw what's just recently happened with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Ralton is operations director currently at DSB Healthcare and has been with the organization for 25 years, so definitely a stalwart within the healthcare industry, holds an MBA and has completed a second master's just in case there wasn't enough work to be done in supply chain management. And he's currently completing, obviously, his PhD, which is what he's here to speak about today. And Ralton actually provides technical assistance to postgraduate students from the University of Johannesburg with their own research in supply chain. So certainly someone who both receives knowledge and gives knowledge, which I think is absolutely beautiful and certainly remarkable. He is absolutely passionate about this sort of symbiosis between supply chain management, which, as I've said, is his areas of expertise, but also within the healthcare sector, looking at things like sustainable warehousing operations, automation, transportation, those type of Lean Six Sigma areas. And he's a well-spoken conference presenter and summits within his discipline. And as part of DSV's corporate social responsibility commitment, he really works with the National Department of Health in providing basic training on good distribution practice at the state provincial pharmaceutical depots, which I think is absolutely incredible and lives up to the Da Vinci dream of contributing towards sustainable societies. Ralton, it absolutely humbles me that you live as a Da Vincian, because I think that by doing that, it is absolutely incredible. Not only, if you didn't think he had enough time to complete 2 masters, etc., he's also served as director on the executive board of SAPSIX, which is the industry body for supply chain professionals in South Africa. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our student speaker today, Ralton Moses, discussing the impact of regulation on the South African pharmaceutical industry.
Thanks, Dr. Kuhn, for that lovely introduction. I really do appreciate it, and I hope I live up to that build-up. So I'm going to go straight into it. As was mentioned in the introduction, I'm operations director at DSV Healthcare, and speaking about the COVID-19 vaccines that's happening in our country at the moment, I'm glad to announce that we've been awarded the Pfizer vaccine distribution in the country. I mean, it's on the news at the moment. So, and yeah, I think that's good news for us. And just to let you know, as fellow South Africans, you're in good hands. My research topic is the impact of regulation in the South African pharmaceutical industry. I think just as background, firstly, the pharmaceutical industry is the part of the healthcare sector that deals with medication and drugs intended for human and animal use. You might know the word ivermectin it might resonate with most of you with what's been happening recently with COVID and intended uses originally for animal health, which is now expanded obviously to human health. When I say drugs, it's for human and animal health. The industry comprises of different subfields pertaining to the research and development, manufacture, distribution, and consumption of medication. Just to put in perspective, it is quite a massive industry from a financial perspective. In 2018, the industry was worth over $5 billion US. That's in South Africa alone. It's a fairly developed industry with 2-tier structure, so being the state, which is government, and the private sector. The industry directly affects the greater population, so and humans. I'm referring to humans. So a number of international regulatory bodies obviously monitor things like drug safety, patents, quality of product or quality of drugs, and pricing, just to name a few. In line with the research topic, and again, just to give you some context and background, regulation in this context can be defined as a sustained and focused control of all laws, regulations, and requirements placed by government on business and society to comply with. In South Africa, the Medicines and Related Substance Control Act, which we in the industry refer to as Act 101, is the principal governing act for manufacture, registration, and sale of drugs. The Medicines Act makes provisions for the publication of numerous regulations and guidelines by the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, which is SAHPRA. You would have heard about SAHPRA a lot in the news recently as well, with registrations of the vaccines and expediting thereof. Passing of laws is a lengthy process. And nowadays, laws are usually written in fairly general terms, and that's to meet present and also future needs that may or may not arise. Regulations, on the other hand, can be passed more rapidly than laws. But it must be noted, and especially for the purpose of this study of what I'm conducting, what doing, is that after approval, regulation has the same power as law in the country. The South African medical environment is the most regulated on the African continent. In total, there are 52 guidelines for us operating in the industry that we need to comply by, which was issued by SAPRA. There's pending discussion on further regulating the sector, which some argue will stifle competition and increase prices, whilst others are in support, stating that additional regulation is necessary to limit price inflation. Whilst the objectives of regulation are appreciated, and seeing that its intention is to serve public interest, it's not always clear as to what cost these benefits are actually attained whilst implementing this. And for someone that's working in the industry for a quarter of a century, it's still a mystery as to whether the man on the street is ultimately the beneficiary of regulation that's actually imposed on the industry or implemented in the industry. So that's just some background into my research topic, the impact of regulation. So the research will be investigated will investigate two pieces of legislation that have fundamentally changed the pharmaceutical industry in South Africa over the years, and that's got to do with single exit pricing and product patents. So single exit pricing it deals with, I think it's self-explanatory. It's the whatever price the manufacturer sets for a product is something that is seen right up until end user. And the other one is product patents, which has got to do with the patenting of products. So when research and development is conducted to manufacture a product, usually the manufacturing company, and the manufacturing company can be the likes of a Pfizer, are given a patent for X amount of years so that they can recover whatever they've invested in the product itself. So my research will cover that, something that's already been put into place. And then a third legislation which is pending, and that's got to do with the serialization of medicine products. And this has just been promulgated globally and will shortly reach our shores as well, that we need to implement it. That's the third piece of legislation that will make part of the study as well. For the purpose of this research, the pharmaceutical industry in South Africa, according to my research, is defined as the manufacturers, the state as regulator and state as purchaser of medicine, distributors like myself, DSP Healthcare, 3PL, wholesalers, buy and sell, pharmacy groups, independent pharmacies dispensing doctors, and the end user as well, which is ultimately us, the patient of medicine. The research problem for me, what I put down, is that we are undergoing major regulatory reform in South Africa, with more than 800 new acts of parliament being passed since 1994. There's a lot on the go at the moment in terms of new legislation and regulation, with which businesses, both big and small, have to comply, and that's being promulgated. These range from environmental regulations to labor laws to tax laws and to price regulations. And in my opinion, many, if not all, of these regulations have been imposed without a pragmatic analysis to take into account the impact of such laws on the ability of firms to perform optimally. And with big business, and we've seen it in the past year as well, is that it's costly to run big businesses. It's a lot of fixed costs, and it's just getting more costlier, if I can say that. And again, in my opinion, the lack of regulatory impact assessment before implementing putting forward regulation is a flaw in the formulation and implementation of regulations. So that's what I've got as my research problem. The opportunity is taking the pharmaceutical industry as a case study, this research will draw attention to the regulatory web, if I can call it that way, entangling companies, and to highlight the crucial necessity of assessing regulation before and after implementation. This research will also highlight the importance of proper stakeholder engagement in assessing the competition or competitive impact of new laws and regulations. Again, from an opportunity perspective, the research will show that despite an obvious and apparent regulatory excess, governments continue passing legislation that may not be needed and keeping a lot that is actually redundant at this point in time. The aim of the research is to investigate the costs and benefits associated with implementing of proposed regulation, whilst evaluating the performance of existing ones in the South African pharmaceutical industry. From an ontology perspective, and which is my reality, I work in an environment that's got to do with drugs and pharmaceuticals from the point of raw materials up until the point of consumer. That entire supply chain. That's what I'm involved in. And from an epistemology perspective, my involvement in that is from the time product lands into this country up until it gets to the end user. As a 3PL operating in this space, the company that I work for and myself, we ultimately the custodians of that. From a theoretical framework, I think from an assessment guide, the plan was to use the World Health Organization pharmaceutical legislation and regulation assessment guide that deals with policy legislation and regulation, medicine selection and registration, licensing, inspection, control, advertising and promotion, and then compliance and enforcement. Research design. So what I did from a research design perspective, I've actually completed a RAG, red, amber, green, where I've put the quantitative method, the qualitative methods, and I looked which was best suited to my study. And eventually, after looking at the reds and the ambers and the greens, what I found was the best suited for me was to go with the mixed method. And as I said, that was by completing an entire analysis on that from my side for a self-assessment that I've actually done based on the topic at hand. The methodology, it suits this research, and both qualitative and quantitative data will be collected.
So as you now look at your methodology and as you consider how to unpack that, do you foresee any challenges that you might experience? Because normally, from a research perspective, it's good to almost kind of preempt, and say, this might happen, then I will have this plan, or you work out different scenarios, or are you confident that your methodology will be spot on when you execute that to give you the right results?
Yeah, so I did think about that, and obviously COVID has brought about its own challenges. So with my line of work, getting access to, I'm going to call it the respondents, or would have been quite easy. I travel a lot for business, and I'm in the face of the respondents, if I can call it that way, on any given day. But now with the travel restrictions and that type of thing, access to the individuals could be a challenge. Should we have a third wave and we have restrictions again in terms of our movement, then that's one of the big challenges that I foresee at this point in time. Yeah,
and I think just from a methodology perspective, it's good to preempt these things because as you write it up, one almost kind of support the choice that you made at that point in case. So you thought of doing this, but then you end up doing this because of the reality in COVID. It's a big influence. So I think that's it's good to think about that. So
going directly on the tail end of that, Prof. So the data collection method in my head would have been that I'll physically meet with all respondents and then present questionnaires and semi-structured interviews with the respondents. And I would send them these questionnaires and in advance so that they know what I'm going to be talking about. And again, as I said previously, before COVID, because I've been in the industry for such a long time and the role that I play in my own organization, I regularly interacting with all facets of the pharmaceutical industry, from manufacturer right up until end user. So that was never going to be a challenge for me from that perspective. So, I mean, the last thing that I want to talk about, and then, I'm guided by yourselves on what to discuss next, is from a contribution perspective obviously for myself and for my organization and then for society at large. In order to promote an efficient and effective regulatory regime and without perpetuating what I consider already regulatory state, government should pass a regulatory impact assessment bill. I think that's needed. That will make it compulsory for public servants to justify the need for any proposed law and then evaluate all existing ones using a cost-benefit analysis approach. Again, I'm speaking off the cuffs here, and I'm just talking from my own experience, is that it's costly to run big businesses. It's costly to run small businesses, and you've got a lot of fixed costs already. We've seen in the past year the impact of COVID. When you don't have that the revenue to substantiate the cost that you're going through or to cater for that, day, you literally close down. And we've seen that in our industry. We've seen that all across South Africa. Our employment rates went to over 30%. In some of the provinces, it was actually reaching to 40%. So, it's very costly to run big businesses, and the perceived benefit that we get from implementing regulations in industries, I don't think that's necessarily thought about comprehensively.
A quick one. We spoke about our regulatory impact assessment bill, which you propose that government should pass. I would suggest you look at SEIAS, SEIAS, social impact, economic impact assessment system. Maybe it means the same thing, I don't know. And also look at Michael Porter's model to see, now that the COVID has come, it's a new scenario. What is it? Can you look at, maybe look at the shortcomings of Michael Porter's model? Or is what is happening in line with Michael Porter's model? Thank you.
SEIS, so thanks for that. It's something that I'll certainly look into. And when you refer to Michael Porter, are you talking about the 5 forces?
Yes.
And what is it specifically that you'd like me to consider there?
The status quo was impacted heavily by an unexpected force, which was the COVID. Nobody expected it. Nobody was ready. Where can you fit it in the Michael Porter model? Just think about it. And if you can improve or come with a new model in line with the Michael Porter model. Thank you.
So Dr. Lloyd, if you want to comment, and then also Prof. Singh.
Thank you very much, Amala. Good afternoon. Yes, I wanted to pick up on the CS process. It's the social, that whole impact assessment of the environment, socio-economic. And it is actually a requirement right now. So no policy, no regulation, and no act can be passed unless the government department responsible has taken it through that process. And it is hugely interrogative, and it actually touches on everything that Ralston has been talking about. And you have to do a cost-benefit analysis, an impact on all the societies and communities. So that already exists. And I think if Ralston went and had a look in the presidency, that's where it finds its home, and the people who look after it, particularly in the DPME component of the presidency. And so I think that would help a lot, because it starts showing how government is realizing that you cannot just pass regulation, pass laws, and you don't actually know what they're about, and also where there are duplications. So you're almost forced to do what I call a helicopter view of all acts, policies, regulations related to a specific item or element. And you have to show that the one you're wanting to bring in will do something different. It's almost like a doctorate. You have to show what your new knowledge will be, what your new impact will be, and also how to maybe have other acts, regulations, and policies then deregulated, if you want to use that word. So have a look at that. Thank you.
Good afternoon to Ralton as well. So I would like to confirm from experience working in the health and wellness sector at national government that the SAES process that Gibson and Dr. Lloyd are referring to is a requirement for over a decade. So there's no escape for any department to even propose legislation without the SAES. So it does involve a fair amount of research, because you can't guess these things in terms of an environmental impact assessment. But what I want to add is that in addition to just doing the impact assessment, when the draft legislation is going to be submitted to Parliament, another process also takes place, and that is the public consultation process. Now, all people in a particular industry, all relevant organizations, businesses, etc., in an industry are consulted, because there's open consultation. The draft is published in the Government Gazette and opens it to public participation. So I think that is where, if there's any suggestions coming regarding the process, improving the process, that is where people can also make their suggestions and recommendations. So I'd advise you strongly to look at that as well in terms of process. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Singh, and agree 100% on that. So the impending regulation that's going to come about, it's going through public consultation process now. So I think things have been put on the back burner because of COVID at the moment. And we were asked to comment as an industry on the impending regulation that's going to be coming, and that's got to do with serialization of pharmaceutical product, where it's going to be tracked and traced up to a pill level. So we have commented on that there, and we're going through that process. So also, I mean, and this is just a general statement, and if anyone's got anything to add to that, I'll appreciate it. Is that we understand the SAES Act of environmental scanning that needs to be done to see if something is warranted or not. Does anyone know of something that happens post implementation of regulation, where we've done an investigation and we've been through the SAES Act, and we said, okay, we still need this regulation, and then go back 2 years, 3 years later on, and to see whether what was researched or investigated back then, did that come to fruition, or is it something totally different?
As Prof. Singh said, the SAES process also relies very heavily on that public comment phase. But after that, you obviously go through your ministerial committees, you go through cabinet, you go through parliament, you go through the parliamentary portfolio committee, etc., etc., etc. And you leave in that body of work with those committees and bodies, you leave a track record of what you say, your act, your regulation, whatever is intended to do. And you get monitored and evaluated. And that's quite a new process now, sort of midterm of implementation. So 3.5 years or maybe 4 years into the act or the policy or regulation, there will be a monitoring and evaluation exercise carried out quite large scale by the Department of Planning in the presidency. But also annually, you are required to report on your implementation plan of that regulation and policy. So I was going to raise the question with Ralston. Is this, maybe he wants to look at it in his environment, is that monitoring and evaluation actually happening properly? Because, and is it reaching the desired result? So we know it happens, But are people just doing tick boxes, or is it really deep reaching and deep and wide? And is that possibly not one of the reasons we have this huge number of acts and policies and little implementation? So maybe if he's looking at the impact of regulation in South Africa in that industry, that could be a very important issue. How deep and wide and effective is that measurement of the intended achievement of that regulation? How deep is it, and how well is it happening? Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Lloyd. Ralton, does that assist?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Dr. Lloyd. That helps me a great amount. And I'm actually going to do that now, because we've had to implement quite a bit of regulation in the past couple of years, and it'll be interesting for me to go back and see what post-mortem was actually done on the regulation that was actually passed, and what was intended through that, and what does if I'm going to call it that, the post-mortem actually reveals. So thanks for that. It does help me a lot.
A quick one regarding policy development and regulations and law. It's important to draw a distinction between the act itself and regulations. It's only the act that goes all the way up to the parliament. There's a specific value chain from start to the end. Policy formulation and policy development is not a one direction process. It is both direction. Policy affect practice, and practice affect policy. It's iterative in a way. But again, regulations are strengthened or amended at a departmental level by a specific responsible minister. You have also looked to that. If there are gaps, I can tell you now there are gaps in a way. For example, if in a particular government department, for some reason there's reshuffling, you find that the new minister has come to a different mandate. The particular minister can easily change the direction. So we really need to look into that. The whole policy formulation practice in South Africa, regulations and the statutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Gibson. And the essence of my study is actually got to do with that. It's the act. There's the act, which, as you say, goes up to parliament level, and the act that we deal with is with Medicines Control Act, which is Act 101. It's the regulation that follows afterwards that's made the industry, again, in my opinion, as more chaotic than anything else. And and as I'm saying, it's going to take a big investigation to see whether what was implemented and when it does come to fruition, does it have the desired outcome or on that there. Thanks for that. I'm in agreement with you.
Thanks for that, Ralton. I'm not sure if there's anyone else, Prof. Kloppo or Dr. Boyce-Elias, but the one thing I want to say is I want to wish you luck on the journey, because I think that it is a journey. And I think that one of the big things I love about Da Vinci doctorates is the fact that the return on investment is not only about an economic or a financial return, which is often the case in many business studies. It is also about the social return and the contribution to society and self. So I really like that you brought that in. And just one piece of advice to keep in mind is that the step up from master's to doctorate is to always remember that it is not about the argumentation of a meta-theoretical framework, but rather that it is about the contribution of new knowledge to the field. So whether you're doing a framework, whether you're doing a model, whether you're contributing something theoretical to the field, to always remember that you have to always answer the question as a doctoral candidate, what new knowledge are you contributing to this discipline, to this field? And just keep that in mind at all times, because it's very easy to slip back into the master's vibe of argumentation rather than contribution. So that's just my little 2 cents with regards to that. So thank you very much. And I think that you've really given us a succinct presentation. Before I introduce our guest speaker, Prof. Kloppo, is there anything you would like to add?
No, I think nothing from my side. I think, Gibson, you had a very interesting junction, and your study is set for sale, and we'll be watching closely. And from the office side, happy to support you and further this discussion. because I think it's an important study that you're busy with. And best of luck with it. Thank you, Dr. Coonan.
And thanks so much to everyone that contributed. And I think it really is a necessary study. So I really do look forward to seeing the progression. And as Prof. Klopper said, we all here, and I know Dr. Lloyd's always willing to put her hand up, Prof. Singh, etc. Dr. Lloyd is not only within her own sector, but she is also a supervisor. So I'm just saying, if you want any contributions from the teams at large at Da Vinci, we do look forward to embarking with you on this journey, because it is a co-creation without doubt. So thank you so much for that.
Personal thank you to everyone who's given me their comment and advice and something to consider. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. And thank you very much to those that did.